Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the November installment of the Read of the Day book club, our co-event series with The Day. I just have a few quick pieces of business to get out of the way before we start this evening's event. First off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Anastasia, and I am the events manager for Bank Square Books and Savoy Bookshop and Cafe. You probably have seen me before if you've attended any of our other virtual events. So just a couple quick little pieces of how you can use this platform as you watch the event tonight. We encourage you to chat in during the event, engage with your fellow audience members. You can express your reactions to things, to our panelists this evening, and of course, ask questions. We do ask that you adhere to our virtual event code of conduct, which I'm going to drop in the chat right now. And essentially just be respectful. And if you're not, or if you witness someone else being disrespectful, please let me know and we will remove them from the event. And with that out of the way, I just want to tell you a little bit about our panelists this evening. So like I said, this is the November installment of the Read of the Day book club, which we put on in partnership with the New London Day. So our journalist of the evening is the wonderful Rick Coster, and Rick interviews our authors for most Read of the Day events. This is no exception. So Rick has been an arts and culture writer at the Day for over 20 years, and he specializes in covering music, books, and dining. And he's an all-around stand-up guy, and we're so lucky that we get to work with him. And our author joining us this evening is Jeff W. Benz, and he is the author of novels Albert Himself, as well as The Mighty Oak, which we're here to discuss this evening. He has also directed an award-winning documentary film, Fat Man's, and he is a professor of fiction and screenwriting at Manhattanville College. Publishers Weekly says of The Mighty Oak that it is filled with memorable characters, pungent dialogue, and a lean, hard-bitten writing style. Ben's superb novel brilliantly faces down traditional notions of manhood. So Rick and Jeff are going to discuss The Mighty Oak for about 20-25 minutes, and then they'll call me back up on screen and we'll take audience questions, which you can submit through the Q&A module, which is right at the bottom of your screen. Okay, and with that, I'm going to call Jeff and Rick back up on stage, and once they've come back up on screen, I will go away and let them take it away.
Magic. It really worked. How did you do that? Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Rick.
How are you, man?
Okay.
We've talked and emailed for weeks now. I feel like we were roommates in a dorm or something. If you lived next to a guy that was 40 years older than you. But welcome. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks to you. Thanks to the Day. Thanks to Anastasia and Bank Square Books. This is great. Thank you.
Well, it's a wonderful book, and I have a lot of questions I want to ask about it. I think the best way to get started, maybe though, is if you're one of those guys who doesn't mind reading a little bit from The Mighty Oak. We would love to hear that. How does that sound?
It sounds great. Great. I'll read the first chapter, which is only 7 pages. I suspect people haven't read the book, so I think that the book is a love story in its way. It's a family story again in its way. I say that as a little bit of a prelude to this first chapter, where we pick up Oak at a point in his life where those two things don't seem to matter, at least in his conscious world. So I'll just start with the the epigraph, or the beginning of the book here. There's 2 quotes. The first is from William Blake. It says, "And we are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love." And the second quote at the start of the book is from the Canadian hockey legend, coach, now broadcaster, controversial figure, Don Cherry. He says, anybody that says they don't like fighting in the NHL have got to be out of their minds. So I'll take the cover off and have at it. All right, chapter 1. When his sister Arlene called from Boston to say their mother was dead, Oak was in an ice bath halfway through a 12-pack of beer in the middle of the Texas afternoon, trying to concentrate on how he was going to knock Pat McDonald's head in. Outside his apartment, the El Paso sun blazed. Inside, he had the apartment lights off as he kept them against the wavering sickness in his head. He hadn't slept again. He hasn't slept much since the headaches that crept in over the summer, his hip and lumbar throbbing in their marrow. His ma wasn't supposed to be dead. When Oak called her to talk to her in July, 3 months ago, she said she was better, that her cancer was on the run. Outside the team bus window, a cattle truck rattles his head. The El Paso storm bus rolls north through the Chihuahuan Desert on the way to the Albuquerque, New Mexico rink at the far northern edge of the West Texas Hockey League. Oak sits alone in a seat at the back of the bus with the other veteran players. The boys are playing cards, they're on their phones. The bus smells of sweat, icy hot, booze breath, and beer farts. Oak takes a drink from the roadie he's got between his knees. He's got a seat reserved on a 4 a.m. Greyhound back from Albuquerque to El Paso and a ticket for a flight from El Paso to Logan for tomorrow afternoon, for after he knocks Pat Sandman McDonald's head off. Oak examines his right fist. He locates the first knuckle of his right index finger down near the middle of his palm. He works the knuckle back toward the base of his finger, sets it more or less back into place. He's got nothing against Pat McDonald. The Albuquerque defenseman is 22, is making a name for himself. Oak understands this, but he's going to do it. He has to do it. Even though McDonald tomahawked Ken Grimes' neck with his stick last spring when Oak wasn't even skating, when Oak was collapsed out in his shitty El Paso apartment with his spinning head and his stitched up post-surgery lumbar spine. He kept meaning to get back to Boston, from Texas, from Florida, where he was before Boston. He hasn't seen his daughter, Kate. He's ashamed that it will take his own mother's funeral for him to see his daughter, to see Kate for the first time in 4 years. Kate was 10, and now she is 14. Oak was 10, and now he is 32. Oak looks back out the bus window at Texas. The sunlight slashes through the gap between his sunglasses and his face. He squeezes his eyes shut again. He hears the blood ringing in his brain. He just needs time, ice time, to get out of Texas and back up a league, and then up another league, up to where he belongs. Oak gets the plastic pill bottle from the pocket of his sweats. He needs 6 Oxy 40s a day to get the job done with Dexy or Adderall. The team doctor cycles him through Vicodin and Tramadol with Ativan and Ambien. Oak pays for the Oxy and the Dexedrine. He's always had headaches, but last February they had started to mess up his brain. The pills helped. He remembers the game when he first really zeroed out. 2 years ago in Florida, nothing really bad had happened. He hadn't even fought. He took a blindside hit from some goon, and then it was an hour later and the game was over. Oak was dressing at his locker when he came to. He had his bell rung too many times to remember, drifted 10 minutes here and there on the bench, but he always came to, drank some water, headbutted the boards to wake himself back up. But that time, in the Florida locker room, when he woke to see his teammates doing their usual shit, laughing so he knew they must have won the game, he remembers the smell of rotting fruit. And then he fell against the dressing room bench and puked on the carpet, the boys giving him shit like he was hungover. He shoved a smile on his face, getting to the toilet stall where he sat for he can't remember how long, steadying his brain in his busted up hands. He spaces the Oxy out, eats them in bursts before games. His soft head led to his busted back, His busted back led to more pills. He knows it. He's read about it. Addiction, CTE. He's not going down that path over the Mexican border with a Pringles can of pills. But the team doctor and dentist are scaling him back, so he's paying premium. He no longer gives a shit what he looks like in practice. He knows he just needs to get his body back in order, his head straightened out. He doesn't even want to take this shit anymore. But if he doesn't, then he can't sleep, can't think, can't skate. He tries to remember to park his truck at the back right corner of parking lots. He writes down that he's eaten. He puts his keys and his phone on a table that he moved next to his apartment door so he can always remember to take them. A semi bursts past the bus window. Oak washes the oxy down with a beer. "We're showmen, Oak," their coach, Tom Bowie, said to him 3 weeks ago on opening day, when Oak fought his first fight since February, his first of 6 in the season's first 10 games, not counting the punch-up last week in the team bar parking lot that their mouthy Long Island born winger started and Oak had to finish. "Oak, no one wants to see you finessing a wrist shot." Maybe it's true, he thinks. On opening day, there were posters for him, flashing phones. The El Paso Storm crowd chanted his name. "He's back," the rink PA said, Oak watching himself overhead on the Jumbotron, delivering hit after hit, punch after punch for Texas. Before that, for Florida, for North Carolina in the ECHL. The crowd and him rising together. He's 15 and scoring. He's 20 and skating. He's 25 and falling from the AHL to the ECHL. He's 32 and closing his eyes behind his shades on a Texas League bus to Albuquerque. He turns toward the bus window again, twists an Adderall 20 capsule and sucks the Addy up his nose. In his head, he sees pictures. His dead ma smoking at his games when he was a kid. His sister Arlene step dancing on a St. Patty's float. His father in a black donkey coat standing by the MBTA trains. And there's Shannon and their baby, Kate, napping in his Providence College hockey house bed. His sister Arlene said Shannon and Kate will be at the funeral on Monday. Kate will be there when they lower his ma into the ground. Then there's a small space break in the last section. The Albuquerque rink is old, steaming with bad air and wet ice. Banners for an MMA fight and a monster truck show hang from the rafters. Oak and his teammates skate on into a fog of booze. The Albuquerque fans pound the glass. They know what's coming. They want it. They've paid for it. Oak skates to the visitors' bench. He shouts over the boards to his coach, Tom Bowie, "Major Tom, you gonna let me skate today, Major?" Major Tom scratches his mustache, spits into the corner of the bench. His coach, his friend. They fished together. They used their sticks on the back nine in the Franklin Mountains, slapping golf balls out toward Juarez. "Just skate your game, Oak," Major yells back, not meeting Oak's eyes. The rink lights snap off. Oak steadies himself against the spots that swirl the ice. He swallows hard, jams his teeth together. He's sweating good now with what's in him, with what he is going to do to Pat McDonald. The spots spin across the ice, the PA growling, "Don't poke the bull if you don't want the horns," as the snorting, flag-waving mascot leads the Albuquerque team onto the ice, steam blasting for the mascot's plastic nose, Metallica's Enter Sandman shaking the arena's air. Oak looks for Pat McDonald. The Jumbotron flashes a montage of the Bulls scoring, hitting, and fighting. Oak opens and closes his gloved fists, shifts his weight from one skate to the other. Up above him, McDonald delivers a massive uppercut to some bender's strapless chin, a halo of sweat exploding from the poor guy's hair. The image freezes. The crowd chants "Sandman" as the rink lights burn back on. A Coke sails down from the stands, hits Oak, ice and Coke running down his back. The Albuquerque crowd bunches near Pat McDonald, waving Sandman posters, snapping photos of McDonald with their phones. In person, Oak realizes McDonald is even bigger and dumber than he looks online. His head is like a cement block. Oak sucks in, blows out, pushes off from the boards. He loops behind their net and smacks his forehead against the corner glass. The fans think he's showboating. He does it again. Grinding his mouthpiece, he skates hard, small circles in the visitor's end. Later, he tells his body, he punches the boards to wake up his bleeding fists. He drives his knees into the air. I'm still the boss of you, he's telling his body. He's telling his head. He's telling his sick, throbbing blood. He roars into speed. His teammates grin, stick slap him as he goes by, Grimesy nodding, Oak squeezing life from every cell he's got. He skates the center line. One of the Albuquerque guys says something to him about how he's done, about how he should go fuck his Texas boyfriend. Oak loops harder around their end. He's flying now, and he cuts across the center line just as McDonald loops by. Oak grabs the kid and spins him. He's not waiting on the national anthem. He's not waiting on the puck. He's peaking. In half an hour, his body will start its grinding collapse. Let's go, Oak says. Later, Pops, McDonald says. One of McDonald's front teeth is gone. Up close, Oak can see the baby fat on the kid's face. Now, Oak drops his gloves, hurls his helmet so that it smacks against the boards. For a split second, waiting on McDonald to drop, an unfamiliar thought flashes in the rising white roar inside Oak that he doesn't have to fight, that he's a dog in a pit. In that flash, Oak lets McDonald's ham fist shoot past his right ear, and Oak straightens the kid with 3 quick blows, chin, nose, temple. McDonald shove hooks the side of Oak's head, Oak flashing into starburst. The blow is like a thrown brick. The crowd roar, white tunnels into nothing, time slowing as McDonald tries to hook again, the silence spinning as the benches clear around them. Oak ducks, comes back up, McDonald clenches. Oak's been waiting on this. He studied McDonald's clench online. The kid always leaves a gap. Oak shoots a tight uppercut with his right fist into the gap between their chests. McDonald's head snaps backward as Oak knew it would. McDonald's head floats there in front of Oak, a fat, dumb balloon. Oak draws the punch from his legs to his waist, to his shoulder, to his fist, and smashes it. McDonald falls silently into the whiteness, the guy's head bouncing off the ice. Oak times the bounce. As the noise and color rush back in, he hurls a roundhouse to the side of McDonald's face, the force of his own punch bringing Oak to his knees. McDonald's head bursts into blood spray. The roundhouse sends McDonald sliding, his bleeding face smearing the ice. McDonald balls up. The fights around them freeze. The ref gets in front of Oak, and suddenly the ref starts screaming for the rink doctor. Oak hears his own heart and breath. Cups rain down from the stands. Oak, Major Tom runs across the glove-littered rink. Oak sees his mother, dead on her white tiled bathroom floor. He sees his daughter, Kate, skating in white snow. Oak, there's a doctor in red sweats running behind Major Tom. Oak watches them, the doctor slipping on the ice, racing toward McDonald. McDonald lays motionless. Getting closer, Oak sees McDonald's bloodied face. And then he has to look again against what he thinks he is seeing, and it's there. McDonald's right eyeball is hanging wet and red from his shattered eye socket to the blood pool on the ice. The quiet explodes. 2 bulls jump Oak from behind, the blows on him like blocks thrown into black water. And the last page, which is the 3rd section. Later in the parking lot, with the delayed game starting, Oak looks up at the black Albuquerque sky. An ambulance took McDonald away. Oak knew better than to try to see him. Oak just walked up the ramp, and even the fans were quiet. He walked through that quiet and got his skates off and his pads, and he showered off the fight, his whole body shaking so that he had to sit down in the stall. He is still shaking in the parking lot, standing there shaking, when 3 guys come over, having left the game. "There's kids in there," one guy says. "You sick bastard. You may have killed the guy." When the biggest guy throws a punch, Oak takes it to the side of his face, and falling as he takes another punch, he lets the guys take their shots, their punches dissolving in the adrenaline that burns cold inside him. Looking up at the night sky from the Albuquerque parking lot, Oak can feel what they've done to his face and ribs. He can see it in the face of the smallest guy as they run. And he is lying on his back on Castle Island in Southie with his girlfriend Shannon, looking at the Boston stars, Kate still in that place for souls before they get ripped into life. That's chapter 1.
That's magnificent. Just, the first thing I'll say about that, Jeff, is I don't think if anybody remembers from Anastasia's introduction, I don't think any of us would have any problem believing that you teach screenwriting or that you directed an award-winning documentary, because there was so much visual, beautiful danger in that 7 pages. It's so evocative what you did, and pretty much you set up everything we need to know about Oak, and are sort of scared to find out if what we think is true. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, sure. I like, I think the style of the book should pretty much reflect the main character, kind of the protagonist's emotional world. So this book's in present tense, and it's, it moves fairly quickly, I think, because Oak's not a guy that's going to perhaps examine himself too much. That sort of presses through that self-examination maybe as the book goes on, not with any intention on behalf of Oak. It just sort of does, as it sometimes does in our lives. I think this is the first catalyst toward that, this and his mother's death. But regardless, I don't know if we have writers with us here, and thanks to everybody for showing up and having an interest. But I like, in any fiction that is visual and active. That doesn't mean like action. That first novel I wrote, 100 years ago, is a pretty quiet book. But I think it probably still is visual and active, because it seems to me that the visuals and the actions, if I can get good visuals, good actions, I can hopefully get the reader to feel what the character is feeling, rather than having to tell the reader, through some kind of narration or reporting what the character is feeling. So yeah, I like that about screenwriting, I suppose. Though of course screenwriting is a very different beast than fiction writing. But yeah, I like the active. Yeah.
It is very different, but you certainly you can capture the visuals really well. And I have interviewed so many authors in the course of my career, which has been a real blessing and instructionally embarrassing. But you're the first one I've talked to, and you and I discussed this because I wrote an article that appeared in the Day on Saturday, and as I said at the outset, we've gone back and forth, email and stuff. So we've talked a little bit about process.
Yeah.
There are folks who do incredibly detailed outlines and know every possible scenario before they even start on page 1. There are others who might have a vague idea or the idea, a scene maybe, and they use that as a trampoline to burst into a project. You're the first one. When we talked 3 different times, I think you alluded to the idea of a combination of character and place and occupation,
Yeah.
which was an interesting combination. And as I read The Mighty Oak, boy, it definitely reflects that. But could you talk about that idea a little bit as it applies to this specific book?
Well, I think that, I didn't play hockey. I certainly didn't play minor league professional hockey or Division I hockey in college, this sort of thing. But I think to me, I have to kind of be like place, job, they have to kind of almost call to me. That sounds funny, but it seems to me, in my experience, that if there's a place or series of places that interest me, and occupations within those places that also interest me, that's how I'm going to get mileage and have the best chance at creating emotion that I hope the reader will feel, So it seems to me that it doesn't really matter what the place or the jobs are. If as a writer, the job kind of calls to me, I feel like that's my best shot for making it of interest to someone else. So I just think that the problem can be that if we take from our own lives, perhaps, the kind of places and the jobs perhaps have too much of an emotional neutrality to them. And so as a writer, it's like, okay, well, then I have to find kind of the forward movement and the emotionality elsewhere, which is possible, of course. But for me, if I can come back to a place because I chose it, because it's of interest to me, if I can come back to the jobs that I've chosen because they are of interest to me, that I think is a way for me to always know I'm sort of on the right track, that I'm not kind of BSing with language left or right and kind of going nowhere. Of course, it's hard to find places and jobs, I think. Some jobs and places will sound really exciting just naturally. A nuclear submarine, that's probably a great thing to write about if you were called to it. But if I were to try to write a novel about a nuclear submarine, I wouldn't have the interesting as it would be, actually, I still wouldn't have like the connection to it that would allow me to do. The Mighty Oak took 10 years of research, took 10 years to write. What's the book? 270 pages, and a lot of that was researching, I hope, from an authentic interest that I had in the places and the jobs. I know that's a long-winded answer. I hope that gets sort of at it.
No, it was a general question, but something that really interested me because, again, as you repeated those components when we talked, and I read the book, I saw what you were talking about. Let me ask you a little bit about Oak. In that incredibly evocative punch you in the gut, literally, chapter 1 that you read to us, you have put, we are interested, and readers are interested in this guy, but man, is he in trouble. We're going to start chapter 2 thinking, this is a guy that is damaged emotionally, physically. He knows he's an addict. He's got to go back home to a daughter he hasn't seen in years, and you established very quickly that he is extremely guilty about that. His mom is dead. He still wants to rise back through the levels of the hockey, possibly up to the National Hockey League. I don't know much about hockey, but I was inferring by the end of chapter 1, I don't think this guy's got much of a shot. But that's what makes him a dreamer that I can relate to. So I guess that's a long-winded way to start a question, but you put yourself on a high wire by the end of page 7. Did you know how the hell you were going to cross this high wire? Does that make sense? 'Cause you could fall in a lot of ways there and paint yourself.
Well, yeah, I did mention it took 10 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, look, it seems to me I'm not much of a, you mentioned outlining before. Again, if there's writers watching this or folks who are working on stuff, yeah, I mean, if you can outline your novel beforehand, that's amazing. When I teach or whatever, if you can teach it, when I lead discussions around writing, I often will say, if somebody's writing a novel, you got to work, it's like you must outline the whole novel before you start. You must. And like so much in life, it's the paradox, but you probably can't. You probably won't. I never have been able to. So it's like, you got to force yourself to try to write the perfect outline and eventually just start writing. So we're sort of writing and outlining, at the same time. But so for me, plot, more to the question, plot, I think that, and you and I have talked about this, and I think you put it in the beautiful article that you wrote. So thank you. But it seems to me all protagonists are wounded to some extent. Depending on genre and type, it could be a comedic wound, a wound that plays out comedically. If it's loud, kind of easy, let's say, action drama, it could just be something, as big as the death of someone near to them or something like this, and we have some kind of revenge plot. But as we get closer to reality, it seems to me that protagonists have some kind of wound, usually internal wound, seems to me. Oak has external wounds that have come from his internal wounds, maybe. And that plot is probably, to me, just putting pressure on that wound. We put pressure across a book, and at some point that wound has to transform, for better or for ill, hopefully for better, but not always, So that's sort of, so no, it's like, I'm not sure. This book has had different openings. It finally, I think when I hit that opening, going back to what we said, trying to get right from an authentic place, my gut sort of knew that was the right opening. I was very happy. I don't know if saying that the chapter is successful, but it is what I was hoping more or less to do with the first chapter, And so then you go on to the second chapter. Okay, where does that go? What would he do? How much time? I could have gone to him on the bus or on the airplane or on his arrival. But if you were to read the book, you'll see the second chapter pretty much just picks up. I know you have, if folks do, it pretty much picks up at the funeral in Boston, And we introduce those family elements that he's sort of suppressing, but that are bubbling up in his wounded way in that first chapter. So how's that? Like, pressure on the protagonist's wound is one way to find a plot across a book. But God knows outlining would be more efficient.
Yeah, well, it worked out. It worked out 10 years, but a decade well spent. But
yes, thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, I said I guess so. Thank you.
One thing, there on many levels, this book is so contemporary because it deals with issues like most of us are sports fans on one level or another, and you have a protagonist who is dealing with CTE or possibly CTE, some sort of brain damage. His spine is completely messed up. That is an issue that we read about every day, particularly in the NFL as well as the National Hockey League. That's an issue that you cover or address and explore. There's another one that is directly connected with the opioid crisis, which is obviously a huge deal. And at a certain point, I'm not going to necessarily say it is Oak, but he's skating on what might be described by sports doctors or people who prescribe drugs that are kind of shady. He's got pills, and there's an artificial line drawn between, well, there's a legitimacy to getting a prescription for a pill as opposed to going into the alley and buying heroin from somebody. At a certain point, you sort of drop what I considered to be a time bomb in the novel with the introduction at a certain place with somebody in the novel of heroin.
Yeah.
That hung heavy over me, like, where is this going to surface again if it does? Talk about the intersection of the opioid crisis with someone that has no interest in getting high and someone who is so devoted and blind to the rest of his life that he would risk further damage to his body by playing hockey and by saying, I got to get narcotized enough to keep doing this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's his wound, isn't it? And so the question becomes, how do we reveal the roots of that wound, and how do we put pressure on that wound? And a wound like that, I mean, I'm sure we all know people, sadly, that have addiction issues. And of course, the opioid fentanyl crisis is all across Massachusetts, where the book primarily takes place, probably in Connecticut, certainly much of New England, because it's so cheap now. And highly dangerous, as we all know. So, you say Oak doesn't like to get high. It's true. I mean, that's not why he's doing it.
Right.
But at a certain point, the question becomes, from what you've said, I mean, why is he taking them? He's saying he's taking it to get back up 2 leagues. Well, he's 32. The book could have started in his backstory in a more traditional way, but I wanted to pick it up with him at a low, hard point. But I mean, this is a guy that grew up in South Boston and was a big guy and liked hockey and was really good at hockey. At age 8, he's really good. He's really good at age 10. He's boxing as well, and he's really good at that. He's big at age 11 and really good. At 14, he's skating with the varsity at a really good hockey school. Gets a ride to Providence College, where he's really good at that Division I school, and plays briefly in the AHL, but then for a considerable time in the league below, which is a very high standard, the ECHL. But, across his 20s, he goes Michigan and down to North Carolina, then down to Florida and across Florida into lesser leagues. And we pick him up in West Texas Hockey League, which is a fabrication, but it's quite similar to leagues in Texas, as you probably know, Rick. Yeah. So were he looking squarely at his life, he would say, well, I'm 32. I don't consider myself an enforcer, so-called goon. That's not who I ever wanted to be. I love this game. I thought I was going to be like a power defenseman. And now I'm like getting paid cash sometimes by the owners of the club, after the game and things like this, and literally scheduling fights on a calendar to know who I'm going to fight, and taking pills for this and not sleeping for this. And were he to look squarely at his life, it would be very clear that rising back up is going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. So when heroin, which sadly is pretty ripe in certain Boston neighborhoods, regardless of class sometimes, which I think the book gets at, that's the next drug, isn't it? That's the next step. And of course, there's zero ways in which heroin might help your skate. So Oak isn't going to take it. For folks that are wondering if this is that sort of book, he's not going to. Let's put it this way. Oak knows that much about that drug because he doesn't see himself as someone looking to escape or get high. But as you say, it starts floating around the book early and does play some consequences as the book goes on.
You know, he does look forward to the opportunity. He thinks he's going to be in Boston for a few days and then get back to playing hockey. And then something happens. I'm not sure how much you want me to divulge in this, but something happens.
Because I hope folks will read it and will enjoy it, as it unfolds.
Yeah. So is it okay if I say it turns out he's going to be in Boston for a few days?
Longer than he expected, yes.
Yeah. And so that's going to give him the opportunity that he thinks he wants, which is to reconnect on a certain level, hopefully emotionally, with his daughter, who he does love. But at the same time, there is so much psychological and affectionate. He can't take that step. There's something. Is that fair enough to say? He just can't. But he runs in quite by chance to a young person who needs some help, and he takes the step to help that person. At the same time, he gets into some trouble and meets an attorney who might be able to help him out of the trouble. Maybe there's something emotional there. I'm trying to walk the tightrope, not trying to tell too much, but in other words, he's got family there with whom he desperately wants to reconcile. Can't quite make that step, and it's almost like he has a substitute family of sorts in 2 or 3 parts. It's amazingly poignant and introduces some amazing characters. And I didn't know how you were going to reconcile that. So this comes again back to the outline sort of question, but did you know how this was all going to work itself out? Because when I finished, I thought, I'm not sure I thought that was going to happen.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I guess I could speak to 2 points, a little craft kind of point. Can you hear me? It says my connection is unstable. Are we okay?
Yeah, I've got you.
Great. A little craft point. I think while I'm suggesting that really outlining is difficult for me, I am writing and trying to outline simultaneously. And I don't think I would start something, even a short story or a screenplay or a novel, without having a sense of my ending. So I didn't know, although actually that ending scene kind of came to me pretty quick, but that's not really to the point. I didn't know what the ending would be, but I knew, and I think it's good to know, like, is your ending going to be lean toward happy, lean toward sad, 100% happy, 100% tragedy? You know what I mean? I think it's good to know, like, the shading of the ending before I start. So I knew the flavor of that ending, but not the specifics. To the kind of surrogate family, well, yeah, I mean, this is a larger point. I won't spend too much time on it, but okay, this is a broken down 32-year-old athlete who thinks he can still make it back, and is addicted to drugs and painkillers and has a daughter he hasn't seen. I mean, not for nothing, but that's not an unfamiliar story to me. To be honest, I mean, it's The Wrestler, if you saw that movie, it's The Champion, that book. I mean, we've seen a version of this story. So if I just tried to write this story, it would probably be cliched. And as you say, he would probably be, I'm glad that you didn't know where it was going and that you found some poignancy and some unexpected things, because to me, that comes from the authentic place I'm trying to write the book. Doesn't mean it's going to be, I mean, I hope it's enjoyable, right? But I mean, it comes out of this approach that I'm suggesting. So the difference, I think, between a trope and a cliche is what the writer brings to it. I really wanted to write this story about this guy, and I really wanted to write this story about his daughter and about these other characters that you mentioned. a guy like Oak can't just go embrace his daughter after 4 years of not speaking to her. I mean, that's outrageous. And have them both say, well, we'll work it out, it's going to be fine. That's sadly, I guess, sometimes what we see. And I suppose there's a certain simple pleasure in that sort of thing, but that's not really the kind of story or character interaction that is of interest to me. So, I mean, he's got to grind and he's got to make mistakes and he's got to, what's the term? Deflect, he's got to deflect as this wound inside him starts to transform.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, I know that Anastasia is probably going to have some questions for us, but do I have time, Anastasia, to quit? We have so many writers that watch these things that I always like to try to ask one or two writing profession questions. And it seems, yeah, cool. It seems to me that this is a project that took you 10 years. So, and it is not remotely what I would call commercial or genre fiction, although it is eminently readable. Once you start it, you're not going to put it down. But it's not a mystery. It's not a romance or a psychological thriller or whatever.
That's right.
At what point did you have your agent the whole time for this process? Or when did you feel comfortable enough to query the agent? And was it fairly easy to get one? And then how much work did you do before the book went out to publishers?
Yeah, well, I'd had a different agent, and because so much time had passed, and for various reasons, he's a wonderful guy, but we just sort of I decided it'd probably be better to have a different agent for this book. So, I mean, I've been at this for a while and have a lot of stories out in that first novel and some screenplay stuff, and know a lot of writers. So I had the advantage, agent-wise, just to address that, of having met a number of agents or admiring a number of agents sincerely, or having friends who are writers that would recommend me to their agent, this sort of thing. So when I felt the book was worth querying, I queried a bunch of agents, and that's what you have to do. And I think you have to query them sincerely. For me, because I had some track record, I got a lot of people that read it. I think virtually all of them said they would read it. But notice I say all of them because I had a list. And I'm like, I'll take anyone on this list, And I just sort of went down with those that I was most connected to. And had rejections around pretty much what you said, Rick, which was some of the agents, if their rosters were so full, I think if they didn't see it as an immediate, fairly big sale, they weren't so interested in it, but would love to see the next thing I wrote, kind of thing. So anyways, I ended up pretty quickly, I guess, with a really great agent, and he and I did 2 more drafts of it. We did 1 draft and we had some interest in that. He sent it to a few folks and we had some interest there, not offers. And in hearing what people said, and over time, I kind of had some notion of, I think I know how to get this thing so that it will land and connect in the way that I was hoping it would. So I did another draft. So I guess that's 3 drafts. And then we were luckily able to land that with Blackstone, which is a very interesting and very cool so far publishing company.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great, Jeff, and I bet, Anastasia, that we probably have some folks that would wanted to ask some questions.
We do, yeah. So before I get to audience questions, I just want to thank you both so much for taking the time to join us in the virtual space this evening. I also didn't get a chance during my introduction to talk about how you can buy a copy of The Mighty Oak. So I've put the link in the chat, and I'm going to do so again right now. And you can click that link and it'll take you to our website where you can place an order for the book. And Blackstone is really cool. So we'll actually coordinate with them and the books will just get shipped out. And Jeff is going to sign book plates for us. So all the books ordered through the event will get a signed book plate. And if you'd like your book plate to be personalized, you can put that information in the order comments, and we'll coordinate that. So it'll take a couple extra days to get the book, but you can click the link and order it, and we'll get you a signed copy, which is, you know, what we all want when we go to an author event, right? So definitely check that out. And with that, I've got two really interesting audience questions. Nancy asks, Jeff, in both of your books, you fully embody your protagonists. How do you capture this so successfully? Tips for writers are welcome.
Well, I think it's important to kind of feel the character. So we talked about place and job, and I think it's important to, you know, to feel the character in this case, his place or in his work. And I'm always talking with folks who look at writing with me. I'm always talking about kind of writing from the gut. You know, we got to write as authors from the gut and from the heart, I think, more than the head. You know, Rick was talking genre. Yeah, maybe. I mean, obviously, if you're writing a mystery, you've got to have really a lot of headiness in it, because that's part of the fun of a mystery, is you're outsmarting the reader, you know, in a sense. That's not true of more literary or book clubby fiction. So I think the idea is to feel what the character is feeling in the scene and to write from that place. And again, if the scene is active and visual, then there are things for the character to do as well to kind of express what you're feeling. You know, when the book sold, we did another little polish. No, I mean, we did another small edit, but a really, really helpful edit with an editor named Michael Signorelli, who was just very, very helpful to the book. But regardless, in one scene, I think Oak is looking in a bathroom mirror or something. And I couldn't remember if he had a beard or not, you know, until I read this scene. But I remember just what his face felt like when he was looking in the mirror, you know, because it's like 2 years when you sell it and then you do the edit. So, but I could remember his face, what it felt like. So I think that's it, is to feel the body of the character and to kind of write from the inside out that way. And to gut check yourself to make sure that that's the way you're writing, and that you're not trying to kind of brain it out and hope that this is what the character would feel or do.
Yeah, absolutely. That was awesome. And that actually segues us really perfectly into the other audience question that we have. And Rick, this sort of ties back into what you had asked Jeff right before we moved into audience questions about the duration of time that it took to write the book. So our other audience question this evening is, you wrote the book over 10 years without an outline. There are not too many characters. Did you have other main characters along the way that you decided to exclude? Do you have some people that didn't make the cut?
I had a character. I mean, there is a type of love interest in this book. That character changed early on, yeah. And there were some other characters. There's a character named Shark in this book and runs a boxing gym kind of thing. And he took on a larger role. This other character sort of transformed. So yeah, I think that we need to be open again to ways that the story might transform and characters might transform. It's always weird when you have a character and you're like, well, I'm going to get rid of this character because it's like, but you know, nobody knows you did it. You know, people only know the final book. So but yeah, I think that's part of it, especially if you're not going to outline. This notion of writing forward, then outlining, writing forward, then outlining, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 4 steps back, you know, finally 5 steps forward, this sort of thing. So this notion of writing forward and outlining at the same time and revising like that certainly leads to changes like that. Yeah. But a lot of it was research, man. I had like I was telling Rick, I had like 3 of those giant plastic bins that you might keep in your garage, you know, full of books and notes and interviews and CDs and this sort of thing, to make sure that the jobs and places, you know, read the narrow sliver of the jobs and places that I explore read authentically.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think we can probably squeak in one more question before we end this evening. And I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about the title of the book and why our main character's nickname is Oak, because I feel like, and maybe I'm pulling at straws here, but I feel like a mighty oak is sort of the word is escaping me, but essentially like a cultural trope, maybe a descriptor for someone, especially in like classic masculinity. Am I hitting that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, his name is Tim O'Connor.
Mm-hmm.
And in the world that he would be raised, that people would call him Oak, you know what I mean? The O'Connors I knew, you'd call him OC or something like that, you know. It's a nickname world in which he's raised, in which he's still participating. So they would call him Oak because he's a big guy like an oak, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a line in the book, it might even be 2 lines to be honest, but there's a line in the book where he's referred to as the mighty oak with, I think, some, well, I'll just leave it at that, you know. And so I think for the title, there's meant, once you read that first chapter, which we just looked at, there's clearly some, is the term irony, you know, in that title, you know, the mighty oak is not so mighty. And what does that mean to those that want him to be mighty? What does that mean for his own self-image and awareness? It's interesting. I'm interested in like, you know, biology as, you know, not quite as destiny, but as the way that society looks at someone sometimes, and might even narrow their options, you know, depending on the kind of subcultures in which you're raised. So I think, yeah, sure, there's a, you know, there's hopefully a few laughs in the book too.
Yeah, there are.
Yeah, good. So because this world would have laughs in it. And so that title is definitely meant to be sort of, I guess ironic is the term, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And symbolism was the word that literally just flew out of my head like a bird.
Well, that's a discussion for another hour because I don't like symbolism, I don't like metaphor, and I don't like simile, but.
Okay. Well, I'm glad it flew away then.
Yeah,
That brings us right to 7:30. So again, thank you so much to everyone for attending this evening, to all of our audience, both on Facebook Live and here in Zoom. The link to buy the book is right in the chat or above the video if you're here on Facebook. And Rick, Jeff, I'll give you guys a last word.
I would just like to say, Anastasia, thank you guys as always for doing what you do so well. And I don't know how you stay as busy coordinating these things as you do, but thank you. Jeff, what a pleasure. I've enjoyed this past 2 weeks going back and forth with you. And folks, it's a remarkable book. You will not regret it, and you will not, it reads with the momentum and energy of a thriller, but it is a very literary experience that will touch you. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, thanks, Bank Square, and for all of you for listening. Thanks. I hope you like it if you read it. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.